The silence that followed Liam's calm revelation hung heavy, thick with the weight of Karen's shattered composure. Her eyes, fixed on the stark black sign, darted frantically between the words, harassment restraining order and pending civil action. The vibrant red flush of indignation that had previously colored her cheeks had entirely vanished, leaving behind a sallow, almost sickly pallor. Her lips, which moments before had been contorted in a sneer of righteous fury, now trembled, uncontrollably. She looked like a puppet whose strings had been abruptly severed, her entire frame sagging. Officer Miller, ever observant, leaned in slightly, his gaze piercing. "A harassment restraining order, Ms. Albright? Is this true?" Karen finally tore, her gaze from the sign, her eyes wide and unfocused, like a cornered animal. She stammered, incoherent sounds escaping her throat. He's lying, he's always lying, it's a trick! He's trying to intimidate me!" Her voice was a pathetic whisper, a stark contrast to her earlier histrionics. The bravado had completely evaporated. Liam met her gaze, his own unwavering. "Officers, I'm afraid Ms. Albright is quite mistaken. The restraining order was granted 2 weeks ago, following a series of escalating incidents, including but not limited to property damage, verbal abuse, and repeated attempts to trespass. The specific case reference number is indeed on the sign, and I have the official court documents here, should you require them." He gestured to a neatly organized folder he had placed on a small patio table, just out of Karen's view, but easily accessible to the officers. Officer Rodriguez, who had been quietly typing on his tablet, looked up. "I'm confirming the active restraining order, sir. It seems legitimate. Ms. Albright, you were served with this, were you not?" Karen shook her head wildly, a single tear escaping her eye and tracking a path through the faint remnants of her carefully applied makeup. "No! No, I wasn't! This is an outrage! He fabricated it! He wants my children to suffer! He wants my house! He wants—" Her voice trailed off into a whimper. "Ma'am," Officer Miller interrupted, his voice now devoid of patience. "Falsifying a police report is a serious offense, and violating a restraining order is also a serious offense. Your 911 call, which you categorized as an emergency, appears to be a direct consequence of your desire to access Mr. Vance's private property, despite a legal order explicitly forbidding harassment, and by extension, attempts to coerce access. Furthermore, claiming an emergency to dispatch officers for a non-emergency situation diverts resources from actual crises." Karen visibly flinched at the word falsifying. Her eyes darted around, searching for an escape, a way to spin this. But Liam had meticulously sealed every loophole. The camera perched high on the corner of his house, almost invisible against the eaves, now seemed to gleam with a cold, unforgiving light. The sign, so direct and unambiguous, felt like a physical barrier between her and her rapidly dwindling sense of control. "Officer, I'd also like to formally press charges for the false 911 call and for violating the restraining order," Liam stated calmly, his voice ringing with a quiet authority that solidified his position. "As the sign indicates, all interactions, including this one, are being recorded and will be submitted as evidence." Officer Rodriguez nodded. "Understood, Mr. Vance. We'll need a statement from you and any supporting documentation. Ms. Albright, we need to speak with you privately regarding this restraining order and the nature of your call." Karen stared at Liam, her eyes blazing with a newfound, terrifying hatred that replaced her earlier shock. This wasn't just about the pool anymore. It was about humiliation, public defeat, and the slow unraveling of her carefully constructed facade of suburban perfection. She opened her mouth, perhaps to hurl another accusation, but Officer Miller stepped between them, effectively cutting off her line of sight to Liam. "Ms. Albright, we need you to step away from the fence now," Officer Miller instructed, his hand lightly touching her arm, guiding her away from Liam's property. Karen stumbled back, her eyes still fixed on Liam's calm, almost impassive face. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't lost his temper. He had simply laid out the facts, backed by legal documentation and surveillance, and watched her world crumble around her. The silent victory was far more devastating than any shouted argument, as E. The officers led Karen towards their patrol cars. Liam could hear snippets of their conversation. Karen's voice, now reduced to a choked, desperate plea, punctuated by the officer's firm, unyielding questions. He watched as she was placed in the back of one of the patrol cars, not in handcuffs, but with a palpable sense of being contained, of her freedom curtailed. The flashing lights continued to pulse, a silent siren marking the end of one battle and the beginning of another. He remained by the fence, watching the cars drive away until they disappeared around the bend. The silence that returned was deeper, more profound than before. The peace he had sought earlier had finally settled over his backyard, but it was a peace hard won, tinged with the lingering scent of conflict. He walked back to his chaise lounge, but didn't sit. Instead, he looked up at the unobtrusive camera, a small dark eye watching over his sanctuary. Then he looked at his sparkling pool, its inviting blue surface reflecting the last rays of the setting sun. This wasn't just a pool, it was a line drawn in the sand, a declaration of independence and a promise that he would protect what was his. And Karen, sitting in the back of a police cruiser, had just learned that Liam Vance was not a man to be trifled with. The real fight, he knew, had only just begun. The interior of the patrol car felt stark and claustrophobic to Karen. The plastic-coated back seat offered no comfort, and the scent of stale disinfectant mingled with a faint, metallic tang she couldn't quite place. She pressed her face against the cool glass of the window, watching her meticulously manicured lawn shrink in the rearview mirror, her perfect suburban life momentarily replaced by the cold, impersonal reality of the police station. Humiliation simmered beneath her skin, a burning rage directed solely at Liam Vance. How dare he? How dare he turn her own righteous indignation into a legal trap? At the station, the fluorescent lights hummed with an irritating buzz, casting a harsh, unforgiving glow on everything. She was led to a small, windowless interview room, the air thick with an unspoken expectation. Officer Rodriguez, his face still unreadable, began to explain the charges. Filing a false police report, and more critically, violating an active restraining order. Each word was a fresh stab, dissecting her carefully constructed world. Ms. Albright, the harassment restraining order clearly states that you are to cease all contact and maintain a specified distance from Mr. Vance and his property, Officer Rodriguez stated, his voice flat. He pushed a printed document across the table. You were served with this, correct? Karen's mind raced. She remembered the official-looking envelope, arriving shortly after Liam had started the pool excavation. She had dismissed it as a scare tactic, an empty threat from a man she considered beneath her. She hadn't even opened it fully, tossing it onto a pile of junk mail. Now that casual disregard felt like a lead weight in her stomach. I don't recall, she lied, her voice reedy. There's so much mail. He's always sending things, it must have been lost. Officer Rodriguez's expression didn't change. We have a signed affidavit from the process server. The order was delivered personally to your address. Furthermore, your 911 call, which you initiated, involved a direct complaint about Mr. Vance's property, explicitly demanding access, which constitutes direct contact and a violation of the order. The weight of the situation began to truly settle. This wasn't just a neighborhood spat. This was a legal quagmire. The officers weren't impressed by her tears or her manufactured outrage. They were focused on facts, on legal documents, on the cold, hard evidence Liam had so meticulously collected. The video surveillance, the timestamps, her own desperate 911 call. Back at his house, Liam was already speaking with Officer Miller, providing his formal statement. He recounted the long history of Karen's increasingly aggressive behavior, starting with the subtle digs about his choice of landscaping, escalating to outright verbal abuse during the pool's construction, and culminating in the deliberate dumping of construction debris onto his property. He showed the officer the court documents for the restraining order, the photographs he had meticulously taken of the damage, and the logs of the dates and times of Karen's outbursts. He even had a recording of one of her early morning rants from his porch camera, explicitly stating her intention to make his life hell if he didn't comply with her demands regarding the pool. "It's been a systematic campaign, officer," Liam explained, his voice calm, rational. "I tried to resolve it amicably, multiple times. When that failed, I sought legal protection. This 911 call was simply the culmination of her continued disregard for that order, and frankly, for basic neighborly conduct." Officer Miller listened intently, nodding occasionally. "It certainly sounds like you've done everything by the book, Mr. Vance. We'll be forwarding this to the district attorney's office. Given the existing restraining order and the false report, Ms. Albright is looking at some significant charges." Liam nodded, a somber expression on his face. There was no joy in this, only a profound weariness. He had simply wanted peace, to enjoy the fruits of his labor. But Karen's relentless malice had forced his hand. As evening descended, casting long shadows across his backyard, Liam still felt the residual tension in the air. He decided to take a late-night swim, hoping the cool water would wash away the lingering stress. The pool lights glowed softly, illuminating the crystal-clear depths. He pushed off the edge, gliding through the water, the rhythmic strokes a soothing balm. For the first time in months, he felt a sense of control over his own space. Meanwhile, Karen was released, but not without a stern warning and a clear understanding that charges were imminent. Her husband, Gary, a perpetually harried man who seemed to have long ago surrendered to Karen's volatile temperament, picked her up. He said little, his face etched with a familiar mixture of exasperation and resignation. As they drove home, Karen seethed. "He set me up, Gary. That monster set me up. He wants to ruin us. He wants my house." Gary sighed, gripping the steering wheel. "Karen, what did the police say about the restraining order?" "It's fake. It has to be. I never saw it. He's just trying to control me." Gary glanced at her, a flicker of something in his eyes. Pity? Annoyance? The officer said it was valid. They said you're not supposed to go near his property, and you called 911. "It was an emergency! My children's safety!" Karen shrieked. But even to her own ears, the words sounded hollow, stripped of their power. She was no longer a suburban queen demanding her due. She was a woman facing serious legal trouble. They pulled into their driveway. The house, usually a beacon of manicured perfection, now seemed to loom over them, a silent witness to her crumbling authority. Karen got out of the car, her gaze immediately drawn to Liam's property. The pool, now softly lit, seemed to shimmer mockingly, and then her eyes landed on the sign. It was still there, bolder, more menacing than before. She wanted to tear it down, to smash it into 1,000 pieces. But the memory of Officer Miller's stern gaze, of Officer Rodriguez's precise, unyielding words, held her back. She looked up at Liam's house, at the corner where the surveillance camera glinted, a silent, all-seeing eye. Then she saw him. Liam, silhouetted against the soft glow of his pool lights, swimming leisurely, seemingly unbothered, enjoying the very thing she had tried so desperately to claim. A fresh wave of fury, cold and sharp, washed over her. This wasn't over, not by a long shot, but her usual tactics had failed. She needed a new plan, a more subtle, more devastating way to make him pay. And as she watched him, an insidious idea began to fester in her mind, far more dangerous than any 911 call. Karen spent the next few days holed up in her house, nursing a potent brew of resentment and wounded pride. The immediate aftermath of her arrest, the public humiliation, and the legal threat had left her reeling. Gary, bless his oblivious heart, had tried to offer platitudes, but his usual timid deference only fueled her anger. She needed a new strategy, something that wouldn't involve direct confrontation or the police. Her mind, usually a whirlwind of trivial neighborhood gossip, now sharpened with a malicious focus. The insidious idea had begun as a whisper in the darkest corners of her mind, but it quickly blossomed into a fully formed plan. It was subtle, insidious, and, she believed, untraceable. If she couldn't claim Liam's pool, she would simply make it impossible for him to enjoy it. Not physically, not legally, but socially. She would turn the entire neighborhood against him. Her target, the HOA. Karen had always been a fixture in the Sycamore Lane Homeowners Association, her voice usually the loudest, her opinions presented as immutable facts. She was on the welcoming committee, the landscaping committee, and had even tried to chair the community aesthetics committee, a thinly veiled attempt to dictate her neighbors' tastes. She knew the bylaws inside and out, not for adherence, but for weaponization. Her first move was deceptively innocent. She started with casual conversations with other neighbors, feigning concern. "Oh, isn't it just a shame about Liam's pool?" She'd begin, sighing dramatically. "Such a lovely addition, but the noise, it's just so disruptive, isn't it? And the glare from the lights at night truly takes away from the peaceful ambiance of our neighborhood." She wouldn't explicitly complain. She'd merely plant seeds of discontent, letting their own minor grievances fester into something larger. Then came the emails. Anonymous, of course. Sent from a burner account she'd created, disguised with a VPN. These emails, addressed to the HOA board and seemingly from concerned residents, detailed a litany of supposed infractions: excessive noise complaints, bright lights disturbing sleep, unsubstantiated claims of increased traffic, pool cleaners, delivery trucks, and vague suggestions of unseemly behavior around the pool. Each email was carefully crafted, avoiding direct lies but weaving a tapestry of distorted truths and insinuation. "I saw a large gathering there last night, very late," one email might say, omitting that the large gathering was Liam and 2 friends having a quiet beer. Liam, meanwhile, was enjoying the newfound peace. The police incident had, surprisingly, brought a sense of calm. Karen hadn't approached him, hadn't shrieked from her fence. He even thought, for a fleeting moment, that she had finally accepted defeat. He spent his evenings swimming, the quiet, lapping of the water a soothing rhythm after long days at work. He installed a timer on his pool lights, ensuring they turned off by 10 p.m., just to be extra considerate. He was meticulous about maintaining the chemical balance, keeping the water sparkling and the hum of the filter barely audible. Then the letters started arriving. Official-looking envelopes from the Sycamore Lane HOA. The first was a polite courtesy notice about excessive noise. Liam frowned. He almost never had guests, and when he did, they were quiet. He dismissed it as a random complaint, maybe from someone walking by. The second letter was more pointed, citing multiple complaints about disruptive lighting and a general disturbance of neighborhood tranquility associated with his pool. This one surprised him. His lights were on a timer. He rechecked it, functioning perfectly. The third letter, arriving a week later, was a formal summons to an HOA board meeting. The subject line read, "Review of Nuisance Violations, Property of Liam Vance, 1422 Sycamore Lane." It listed an alarming number of complaints, dating back weeks, citing specific dates and times, though the details were always vague. Liam felt a familiar prickle of annoyance, quickly replaced by a cold certainty. Karen. This was her handiwork. He had underestimated her capacity for indirect malice. She wasn't fighting him head-on. She was attacking from the shadows, poisoning the well of neighborhood goodwill. He immediately checked his security camera footage for the dates and times, cited in the letters. What he found confirmed his suspicions. His yard was quiet, his lights dim, his pool serene. Nothing that could remotely be described as a nuisance. The night of the HOA meeting arrived. The community clubhouse was buzzing with an unusual level of anticipation. Karen was already there, positioned strategically near the refreshments table, her head bent in conspiratorial whispers with several neighbors. She looked up as Liam entered, a fleeting smirk on her face, quickly replaced by an expression of serene concern. Liam took a seat, observing the room. He recognized a few faces, some friendly, others neutral, but he could feel a shift in the atmosphere, a palpable tension directed his way. The meeting began, wading through routine matters until the agenda item concerning his property was called. The HOA president, an affable man named Robert, who usually steered clear of conflict, cleared his throat uncomfortably. All right, next. On the agenda, we have a discussion regarding some concerns raised about the property at 1422 Sycamore Lane, specifically regarding the new swimming pool. He gestured vaguely in Liam's direction. Karen immediately raised her hand, a picture of polite concern. Robert, if I may. As a long-standing resident and neighbor, I feel it's my duty to express what many of us are feeling. The noise, the lights, the overall impact on our peaceful community is becoming quite noticeable. My children are having trouble sleeping. Several heads nodded in agreement. Another neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, a woman Karen frequently flattered, spoke up. Yes, it's quite bright, Mr. Vance. My bedroom faces your yard, and it's quite distracting. Liam listened patiently, making mental notes. He waited for a lull, then raised his own hand. Mr. President, members of the board, neighbors, I understand there have been concerns. However, I believe there's been a misunderstanding, or perhaps a coordinated effort to misrepresent the facts. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the room, briefly meeting Karen's eyes. Her expression remained bland, but a flicker of something, unease perhaps, crossed her face. My pool lights are on a timer and switch off by 10 p.m. sharp. As for noise, I rarely have guests, and when I do, we're very mindful of the hour and volume. My property is fully compliant with all HOA bylaws and city ordinances, he continued, his voice calm but firm. Furthermore, my property is under 24/7 video and audio surveillance. I have reviewed all footage corresponding to the dates and times cited in these complaints. What I found was consistent quiet and no excessive lighting. In fact, many of the complaints correspond to times when I wasn't even home, or when my pool lights were already off. A murmur went through the room. Karen's posture stiffened. I believe, Liam concluded, that these complaints are not genuine grievances from multiple residents, but rather a targeted campaign of harassment initiated by a single individual, who is already subject to a harassment restraining order and who has a documented history of making false reports. He pulled out a slim folder from his bag, the same folder he had shown the police. I have here a printout of the restraining order, relevant police reports from a false 911 call made recently, and logs of the HOA complaints versus my surveillance footage. I'd be happy to share these with the board, and indeed with any neighbor who wishes to see the truth. He placed the folder squarely on the table in front of him. Karen's face, which had been a mask of feigned innocence, began to crumble again. She had banked on the anonymity of the emails, on the power of suggestion, on her ability to sway opinion. She hadn't anticipated that Liam would come armed with proof, that he would expose her machinations so publicly. The murmur in the room grew louder, turning into whispers of disbelief. Neighbors exchanged uneasy glances, some looking from Liam's calm, prepared demeanor to Karen's rapidly paling face. The subtle plot she had so carefully woven was unraveling, thread by insidious thread, right before everyone's eyes. The air in the HOA clubhouse crackled with a palpable shift. Karen, who had always commanded the room with her imperious pronouncements, now stood exposed, her carefully constructed facade crumbling. The murmurs intensified, no longer whispers, of vague concern, but outright sounds of shock and disbelief. Neighbors exchanged glances, their expressions morphing from polite attentiveness to varying degrees of discomfort, suspicion, and even thinly veiled anger. Some who had nodded along with Karen's complaints now looked away, ashamed of their unwitting complicity. Robert, the HOA president, cleared his throat again, a nervous habit. He picked up Liam's folder, his eyes scanning the documents. The weight of the official papers, the clear, concise language of the restraining order, and the police reports painted a picture far different from the one Karen had so meticulously crafted. "Mr. Vance has presented compelling evidence," Robert stated, his voice now firm, addressing the room. "These documents, including a valid restraining order against Ms. Albright and reports of a false 911 call, cast a very serious light on the origin of these nuisance complaints. The HOA takes harassment and the misuse of its channels very seriously." Karen found her voice, though it was reedy and desperate, stripped of its usual power. "This is slander. Lies. He's twisting things. My concerns are valid. What about my property values? What about the noise at all hours?" She gestured wildly towards a few of her usual allies, but their eyes studiously avoided hers. The carefully cultivated network of favors and gossip she had built over years was dissolving before her eyes. Liam remained seated, calm and resolute. "Ms. Albright, if you have genuine concerns, the proper channels exist. Filing anonymous, fabricated complaints through burner emails, and attempting to rally neighbors against a private homeowner who is in full compliance with all regulations, especially while under a legal order to cease harassment, is not a valid concern. It is a deliberate and malicious act." The word malicious hung in the air, a bell tolling the end of Karen's reign. Mrs. Henderson, who had earlier complained about the lights, now looked visibly uncomfortable. "Well, I did find the lights a bit bright, but I didn't realize... I mean, if it's all true, Karen..." Her voice trailed off, a nascent apology in the air. The meeting quickly devolved from a debate about Liam's pool into an impromptu reckoning for Karen. Several neighbors, emboldened by Liam's courage and the undeniable evidence, began to speak up, recalling past instances of Karen's meddling, her thinly veiled insults, and her attempts to control various aspects of their lives, from their landscaping choices to their children's playdates. The dam had broken. "She complained about my dog barking even when he was inside," one neighbor exclaimed. "She called the city on my overgrown hedges when they were perfectly trimmed," another added. The whispers swelled into a chorus of long-suppressed grievances, each story a testament to Karen's subtle tyranny. Her face, already pale, flushed crimson, then mottled with splotches of white. She was no longer the accuser. She was the accused, and the jury was composed of the very people she had manipulated for years. Robert, seeing the clear sentiment of the room, made a decisive move. Given the evidence presented by Mr. Vance and the numerous corroborating statements from other residents regarding a pattern of harassment and abuse of HOA procedures, I motion that Ms. Albright be formally censured by the board. Furthermore, I propose a review of her continued eligibility for any HOA committee positions, pending further investigation into these matters, and a formal notification to all residents about the false complaints. The motion passed with an overwhelming majority. Karen, utterly defeated, sat frozen in her chair, her eyes wide and unseeing. The carefully constructed social standing she had so fiercely guarded had collapsed around her. She was no longer the queen of Sycamore Lane. She was an outcast, exposed and shamed. As the meeting concluded and people began to disperse, several neighbors approached Liam, offering apologies and expressions of support. "I'm so sorry, Liam," Mrs. Henderson said. her face genuinely contrite. "I had no idea. We trusted Karen." Liam nodded. "It's all right, Mrs. Henderson. I just want to live in peace." He left the clubhouse, the night air feeling crisp and clean after the stifling atmosphere inside. He didn't look back at Karen, who was still slumped in her chair, ignored by almost everyone. The sound of her quiet sobs was barely audible as he walked away. Back home, Liam stepped into his backyard. The pool, bathed in the soft glow of its underwater lights, looked more inviting than ever. The water was still, reflecting the stars above. He looked up at the unobtrusive surveillance camera, then at the bold sign near the fence. He hadn't just built a pool. He had reclaimed his peace. Karen's last, most insidious attempt to disrupt his life had backfired spectacularly, not only failing to harm him, but ultimately destroying her own standing in the community she had so desperately sought to control. Justice, in its quiet, unassuming way, had finally arrived, and as he slipped into the cool, clear water, he knew, for the first time in a long time, that his home truly was his sanctuary.